you got so much going on with the Elliott case, if he's going to play the rest of the season, what's going on with Kaepernick and his collusion grievance. Happy to actually welcome in Amy Dash. Does a wonderful job. CBS Sports Radio, WFAN legal analyst. Also, check her out online, amydash.com. In-depth info on some of the biggest sports cases and info to help with your fantasy lineups for Zeke. Great follow on Twitter as well, at amy-tv. And she's kind enough to join me on a Friday. Amy, how you been?
Great, Rich. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well,
I'm glad we established this relationship.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it because I'll tell you what, you simplify it, and that's good. I like that. We need things simplified when we start to talk, when you get into the legal aspect of everything. You were all over the Zeke case from the get-go, and we know he won that restraining order Tuesday, prevented the league from implementing its suspension. He's going to play on Sunday. I guess the real question is he, how or why, will he play the rest of the season now?
I wrote an article recently where I said I believe he will play the rest of the season. First of all, he's definitely playing the next 2 weeks, actually, the next 2 games, because there's a hearing on October 30th, and the judge ruled that nothing can happen. He can't be suspended until another judge who's on vacation comes back and decides whether to extend this hold on the suspension. So when it gets to October 30th, we're going to know, or somewhere around that time, whether he's going to play the rest of the season, depending on that outcome. But I think that she's definitely going to extend it, and the reason is because the judge who just gave him this temporary restraining order basically said that the standard is exactly the same for a permanent injunction, which would extend it throughout the whole season. So if he's already ruled that Zeke would be harmed by being put on the bench until the case is heard, and he said it's the exact same standard, then I think that when the judge comes back, she's going to extend it.
But they do, as you just mentioned, they factor in the if he suffers harm, as you mentioned, right? But again, that can't be fixed through monetary compensation. Right.
The test is, if we don't put a hold on the suspension, will he be harmed to the extent that it can't be fixed with money? And the judge said yes, because he will have to sit out. He'll lose out on his career accomplishments. He'll lose out on rushing yards, so he may not be able to retain his title as the league's leading rusher. He may not be able to qualify for the Pro Bowl. So these are things that he can't get back. On the flip side, the NFL doesn't really have anything to lose because he's been playing already. So they're not going to be harmed if he keeps playing. And they basically said that their domestic violence policy enforcement would be harmed because they can't, put up this public perception that they're tough on domestic violence. But the judge did not buy that and said that you can always suspend him in the future, and it would show that you're cracking down on domestic violence.
Do you believe that will be the case? If they do, do you believe possibly next year then he'll serve some type of suspension?
It depends on if they win the case. I think that the NFLPA and Ezekiel Elliott have a stronger case than the NFL, because I think if the standard is fundamental fairness and the court is going to look at whether the arbitration was fair, it wasn't fair if he couldn't cross-examine his accuser or Roger Goodell, and if the lead investigator's notes were hidden.
Okay.
This has nothing to do with whether I think that he committed domestic violence or not, because it's really not about that anymore.
Right.
But I think that there's no way that a court would find that this was a fair arbitration given those facts.
And just to clarify, there was no settlement talks going on in this case?
No, that was fake news. And now all the people that reported that there were settlement talks, a lot of them are saying, oops, there weren't settlement talks.
It's amazing. Everyone rushes very quick. They hear something or they want to report something. In these certain circumstances, this, Amy, you have to be so thorough and you have to be so accurate. And it's funny, too, because, look, it's a conversation for another day how the NFL is sometimes they contradict a lot. They want to enforce certain rules, and they pick and choose how they want to enforce the rules. And the ball's been dropped many times, but it's going to be interesting to see how this really starts to shake out, which kind of brings me to the next. We talked about this over the last several weeks on the air, and it just came to light a lot more during the week with Colin Kaepernick, and the fact that Colin Kaepernick now files a grievance for collusion against NFL owners. The first thing, when I hear this, and we were talking about it the other day on the air, I'm thinking, wow, that's... When you start to bring up the word blackballed and you really want to prove something like that, or collusion, how in the world, how is it going to be, how can he prove this? This is really tough to prove.
Yeah, the standard under the collective bargaining agreement is that he has to prove that 2 or more clubs worked together to restrain competition, to keep him out. And he has to prove it by clear and convincing evidence. So you need a lot of evidence. You need to show that there was an agreement between two or more clubs, or you can show that there was an agreement between one club and the NFL.
Smoking gun. There's no smoking gun. Clubs. Yeah, there's no smoking gun here.
Right, but here's the thing. A lot of people are not looking at the bigger picture. I don't think this is about proving collusion and getting money under the collective bargaining agreement. They're taking a shot at it, but I think even they realize they're probably not going to win. They are filing this grievance as a formality because I think they want to take this case to court on a civil rights argument.
Oh, boy.
And they want to make this way bigger than the NFL, way bigger than collusion. I mean, Colin Kaepernick has already started establishing himself as a civil rights icon. And so I think they are exhausting what they are required to do under the CBA so that they can get this into federal court and make this a landmark case. And a lot of people don't realize that. I'm going to write a more in-depth article about why and you know, why this is important in the context of civil rights, and so people can find it on my blog and on Twitter.
And again, a couple minutes with Amy Dash, CBS Sports Radio, WFAN legal analyst, and of course, you can follow her on Twitter, Amy-TV. The blog is great. It's very in-depth, but it's very simplified as well, amy-.com. I just, real quick before we move on, because I know we're tight on time, going back to Kaepernick for a minute. So, it is amazing because sometimes you want to say let sleeping dogs lie, and that's never the case with the NFL. You believe this is going to be bigger than the league, and I'm just wondering, look, from a PR standpoint, they've been taking hits left and right. Do you believe, though, and I find it hard to believe that this doesn't have to do with money. And maybe it's a cynic in me.
I think money is always a factor, but I really believe that for him, it's the same impetus that had him kneeling in the first place. And that is, he is on a mission to bring attention to what he believes is racial inequality in this country. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't because I need to stay objective.
Sure.
But that is, you know, I think that's what his goal was, and that's what his goal still is. If he gets a couple $1 million under the CBA and wins on a collusion argument, would that be a victory? Yeah. Would he be happy with the money? Probably. But I think the way that he phrased this grievance and the lack of direct evidence, I think he's only bringing this because he thinks that he can take it to court if he doesn't win. And that's the goal here.
Real quick, before we start to close it out, if he were to win this case, I mean, you're basically what you're doing. The precedent's been set here, and all of a sudden you start to say, well, now you really don't have a CBA. I mean, the collective bargaining agreement, this is why it's – I just, like I said, I know what you were saying, but I can't – there's no smoking gun. I don't believe ownership, there was a mandate, don't sign him, this, that, the other thing. But it just seems like if he were to win this collusion case and there's two or more teams that they find out, hey, we don't want to sign this guy, what kind of precedent does that set?
If he wins the collusion case? Well, he can't, you know, there was some discussion that he could try to terminate the CBA under the termination clause. For that, I don't think he would be able to, because you have to basically have the NFLPA bring that for you, and he's hired a private attorney, and you have to prove that like more than half or about half of the clubs colluded together in order to terminate the CBA. But there's another way to undermine the collective bargaining agreement in a court of law, and I think that's where he's headed. Again, more on my blog about that because it's very legally complicated, but I'm going to simplify it.
We like to hear that. All right, before I let you get out of here, listen, I'm curious to get your overall thought on a couple things. Obviously, you're high profile. You're a member of the media. You do radio. You do television. I know over the last several months, a lot of female members of the media, you look at some of the stuff online, you know, just the venom. You look at what's happening during the press conferences with Newton and the reporter, people attacking Jessica Mendoza with the ESPN, Beth Mowins during Monday Night Football. You know, Sam Ponder just recently fires a couple tweets at Barstool Sports for the sexist tweets. And listen, some of it was pretty vile and pretty crude. I'm just wondering what, you know, where's that? Is there ever going to be that fine line? Or, you know, we live in such a PC society, but yet it's easy to say you have to let certain people, even if you're a female reporter in this field or high profile in media, let it roll off your back. But when, you know, it just seems as though you guys sometimes have to walk that fine line, but yet sometimes I don't think people really understand the shots that get fired, especially when it comes to female members of the media.
Yeah, well, our discussion on this arose really because on Twitter somebody complimented me on my looks in actually a very nice, respectful
It was a nice
way.
tweet, it was, and people took it like, hey,
saying like you're beautiful or something to that effect. And then some other guys were like, how dare you comment on her looks? She's an accomplished reporter and a lawyer. And I was like, I am not offended. I take that as a compliment. So I think the point is that we have to toe the line as females and as a society as to what is offensive. Now, if somebody's catcalling me down the street and making me feel uncomfortable, okay, that's offensive. If somebody is saying that they only listen to me or only want to hear me because, I'm sexually stimulating to them or somebody else is sexually stimulating to them and they don't really care about my content or my brains, I would find that offensive. But if somebody says, well, you're beautiful, I would say I would just take it at face value and say, well, thank you very much. That's nice to hear, and that makes me feel good. Or the best compliment is, I love your work. You've educated me. You've made me smarter. I've really gained a lot from it. You've cleared up the situation and made it simpler. That's the best compliment to me. But if somebody says you're beautiful and you're smart, wow, you've got everything, that's also a compliment. So I think for women, if somebody comments on your looks, if you find it offensive, that's your right. But I don't think we need to have other people coming to the defense of women. I think each woman should decide on her own, what she finds offensive and what she doesn't, and how big of a deal she wants to make it. Because otherwise, everything would be scandalous.
Yes.
And we have an oversensitive society. So I think each woman has to decide whether she wants to stand up for herself or how she wants to handle the situation and what she finds offensive and what she doesn't. For me, in particular, I do not find it offensive if a man compliments me on my looks just because I have a career and I'm accomplished.
In 20 seconds, let me ask you this to close it out. I'm just curious. So if you're doing, say the reporter with Carolina, and he said, Cam made the comments basically, I didn't think a female can talk about routes. If you're talking about legal expertise and insert, hey, well, I didn't think a female knew about legal stuff like that, how would you take that?
Somebody said that on Reddit last night.
Oh, did they?
And compared it to Cam. But the thing is, I've received so many overwhelming comments to the contrary about how good my work is that I don't pay attention to the few
knuckleheads out there.
Yeah, dimwits. And the reason I don't is because I don't want to reinforce that negativity. That person is looking for attention. If I give them that attention, then they're going to seek more negative attention.
Yeah, it's like, you're right. It's like we talk about. It's like an addict. Once you respond one time, you're just giving them exactly what they want.
Yeah, and it's really about them. It's not about me. I mean, if they don't appreciate what I have to bring to the table because they have some sort of hidden biases, that's fine with me. I mean, maybe that's because of the way they were raised. I don't know. I don't want to get into it, but I don't take offense to it. Now, there are other people, like, for example, in the Cam Newton situation, that was a very public comment, and it was somewhat humiliating by somebody who has a platform and is supposed to act like a role model, so I don't think it was right. But each person has to respond to it in the way that they want to. If it were me, I probably would have fired something obnoxious back just because I'm a big mouth. But, sometimes people are caught off guard and they just don't know what to say back. So everybody else sort of came to her defense in the moment, which led to him retracting his comments, and actually maybe now he's served as a role model to other people on what not to do. So I think there's always a positive to find in every situation, and we should focus on that.
Amy Dash, CBS Sports Radio, WFAN legal analyst, amydash.com, in depth for the biggest sports cases, info to help fantasy lineups for Zeke, and of course she's very interactive on Twitter at Amy Dash TV. I appreciate it. Great stuff. Listen, hopefully we can get you back on again. We can talk about our Knicks, because I can tell you right now.
Yeah, I love the Knicks. I've been so frustrated for 20 years.
You know what? I just wondering if Melo was telling him, maybe just going up to some of the players last night saying, hey, you know what? You got to get out of here.
I'm so glad that Melo is gone, because I thought that he was a ball hog. I come from an era where I watched the Knicks when I was younger, and I was obsessed. and it was in the 90s, and it was
The
really
heyday.
a team effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Defense,
that's
yep.
why I believe they made it, because they focused on defense, they focused on moving the ball around. It was really, every player brought something to the table. During the Melo era, I felt like it was all about Melo. Now, that's not to say that it's his fault. Maybe the managers just didn't build a team that complemented his skills. But I'm glad that they're reworking things, and I hope to see a successful team in the very near future. Otherwise, I'm going to eat all the ice cream off the shelves at the supermarket.
You'll be all right. Listen, I appreciate it. Great stuff. Hopefully, we can get you back on again, and keep up the great work. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, Rich. Great
all right,
talking to you.
You got it.
Okay,
Amy,
bye.
Thank you, Amy.